We have storytellers all around us, the funny ones, the profound ones, and let's not forget the impulsive ones. Business too runs on many of these stories. Storytelling and content creation has seen its own journey with time. So I figured why not discuss this fairly recent trend of hyperlocalization of content to achieve global positioning. And mind you, this isn't a new thing. I'm sure it's got its own story. Storytelling has been around for as long as human beings learned the art of communication. With fewer one on one interactions, compelling storytelling is one of the last threads holding the potential to any relationship, commercial or personal. Anupama Ramaswamy, managing partner and national creative director, Dentsu Impact, says in an article about storytelling in 2021 by socialsamosa.com that FOMO, fear of missing out, will be a big motivator. So then how does storytelling remain authentic today?
Today we have access to a lot more data, which lets us design the communication for who we're addressing it to. For example, even as simple a thing as being on, say, a social media platform like Instagram. The moment you have a business account, you have insights. I can take a look at my insights and I can see that, let's say that I would get to know that these are the areas or these are the cities that seem to be following me more. This is the age profile that seems to be following me more. This is the time that they seem to be coming in and looking at my stories more. I only recently discovered this. Now, this helps you actually say, okay, then let me engage with who my viewers and my listeners are a lot more. But essentially, I will still be true to what I represent, which is a writer who writes in the area of humor, romance, women's fiction. So it's just that you would say, okay, let me, instead of saying that I will put out very, very generic content, I might say, okay, let me start saying things which are more relevant to the people who are interested in me. Similarly, with access to information, you can make sure that your story becomes relevant. I'll give you as simple an example as when I wrote my first book, Pallavi, which was the first Indian Mills and Boon. We had a discussion. My editors were in the UK, and none of them had actually come to India, and they were coming from the point of view of this is what works for romance, and they should know because they are the world's Harlequin is the world's largest marketer of, and the name that represents romance. It's what Disney is to animation. So they do know their readers and they know their genre. But for instance, we went back and forth for a long time talking about even what constitutes a marriage of convenience, a trope that is seen very, very often in romance. And for them, a marriage of convenience is a marriage which is a business arrangement. Whereas in India, we've had the arranged marriage system forever and ever, and that is what you would associate when you say a marriage of convenience. Now, for them, that was shocking. They said, why would somebody want to forsake their chance at love and to find the person they want? you know so that was unthinkable. But having a marriage which is a business thing, saying, okay, I will give you this much, and you be even, let's say, even historical fiction or romance, or even if you look at a book, say, like Mario Puzo's The Family, which is set in fact, so alliances between kingdoms, saying, okay, I am the emperor, or the whatever of Italy, and I think that it would be strategic for me to tie up with the king of Spain and have our offspring marry, and then the story unfolds from there. But at the root of it, there was a marriage of convenience. So just the concept was alien. But now when we said we're going to do a book for India, when I was doing the first Indian Mills and Boon, my question was, is this book going to be for India? Because if it's going to be for India, then let's not worry about whether an arranged marriage is understood or not. But if you're looking at it from a global reader's point of view, then yeah, okay, I would perhaps try to build in somewhere, bring in an understanding of what this concept stands for. So that itself, just having access to that information or having clarity on who your consumer is, so to speak, that really helps a lot.
Right.
Okay.
Shikha and Padma?
Yeah. Shikha, would you like to go next? I can go otherwise. Okay.
Please go
So
ahead, Shikha.
thank you, Shikha. So, I would agree with what Milind has said. I don't think storytelling will ever die out, right? And I think it's in fact going to only increase with the easy access to, let's say, Google and Bing and all the knowledge portals which they are. People don't need concepts any longer. That's what I see even when we are training at leadership levels, for example. I don't want to start talking of the imposter syndrome because people know about the imposter syndrome, but what they'd like to know is the story behind it. They'd like to be able to identify with different kinds of issues. They'd like to be able to get the personal side of things, right? So I think storytelling increases the relevance at all times and increases the attention. I really like Milind's, example that she's given about books and the fact about like the marriage of convenience. And, that's something which is so Eastern in concept. But at the same time, I'm surprised that the UK authors, Harlequin did not see it because it's been there forever. If you look at, royalty in the UK, it's always been a marriage of convenience between kingdoms and, between France and Germany. And that's what always has happened. So I'm surprised that they did not see it for that. Also, the fact that in India, I don't think the concept of love ever attracts or ever has been there until more recently. And it's more an urban kind of concept. I think lust has been largely the call for any kind of such marriages, especially when it comes to older men and very young women. And you've seen that, even from the Far East coming. So looking at it from the relevance perspective, I think, yes, taking something out of context will definitely not be okay. Similarly, also when we have communication in, let's say, HR or talent management, and we're looking at looking at people who are joining us, for example, I can't talk to them about every single bouquet of the cafeteria benefits that I have in the company. We will need to position whatever is more relevant to them in their circumstance, their environment, and their, like whether they come from the rural area or the urban areas, whether they come from a top degree college or they come from a second tier college, all that makes a difference when you're looking at which benefit to be able to position. So I think positioning is about the relevance of what there is, and which is why if you look at it even in products, and I'm sure Shikha will be able to talk more about that. I'm also a professor of marketing in many colleges at the MBA level. And we definitely look at products today, not just with the USP, but we are looking at it from the MSP angle. And why are we looking at it from the MSP, multiple selling propositions? Because not every proposition is going to appeal to every single customer, and they need to be able to pick and choose. So if I want a shampoo today, I'm not going to be looking at a shampoo that's only going to be having my hair shine, but I'm definitely going to be looking at something that stops hair fall or stops dandruff or whatever. So I will pick and choose amongst the very, the cafeteria of benefits that any particular product offers me, product or service or company or relationship offers me, for example, in order to see what is more relevant to my needs, to my basket of needs. And I think that is where storytelling makes a difference. And that is where you look at this hyper local, like we say, what's it called? High, low, so, right? So the hyper local social content marketing that there is. Why do we look at that? And you look at it from many angles today. It's all about how does one really pick on the relevance of something and give it to them. If you look at the OTT platforms today and the kind of movies that they are available, why do they talk of genres which people are going to be going to, right? Why is it that you go and see something like Don't Breathe, and why is it that they come back and tell you Into the Shadows or this or that? They offer you exactly what you have been liking, and that is where the storytelling continues, to be able to pick on what seems to appeal to you. So I believe storytelling can never die out. It's been there from times immemorial, from the Brahmacharya syndrome, or the Grahasti, or teaching under the trees, for example. Shanti Niketan is all about storytelling. It's not about concepts and textbooks and whatever. I think it has really, Kotler, for example, has been a text in India since the 1970, 1975 for marketing. But we don't talk of Kotler alone and his concepts. We talk of the examples from India. So we talk of, okay, Lux, and why is it that, for instance, the superstar syndrome of films appeals more to people than they would look at, let's say, a fashion queen, right? For them, films and cricket are the things that appeal more. And why is it that it appeals more? Why is it that the sensationalism that there is about whether, Virat Kohli had a son or a daughter and when it was, etc. I mean, these stories are what appeal to people. And I think that's why sensationalism will always sell in a country like India, especially. So hyperlocal social content marketing is extremely, extremely important. That's my take on it as a start. We continue.
And Shikha?
No, I mean, absolutely, I agree with you, ladies. You know, it's so interesting that there was a time when there was television and movies, you know, and it spoke to a larger audience. And now people are sitting at night or in the evenings with their mobile phone literally on their chest like that. So, you know, interaction has become so personal. It is so hyper localized that I think we have to come up with another word for it. This whole thing of vocal for local has become so concentrated right now. So even if a Visit California is coming into India tomorrow, or a Jordan is coming to India tomorrow, they have to speak the language which someone from Bihar also understands, which someone in Bangalore also understands. In fact, you know, there are some Google articles I was reading the other day where they are saying English is over. You know, you have to be able to talk to an English, there is no English language anymore. You have to talk in all the vernacular languages to everybody. So every Indian is looking at a content creator or a marketing message or a PR message that this should speak to me. So that's why I find how storytelling has become so hyper localized. It's become so specific, you know, that there is now no one size fits all anymore. So for me as a PR strategist, as a content creator, it's a really, really interesting time we are living in. Globalization, yes, is there. But I think what last year has also taught us is that we are all like cocooning so much that even content has become like that. You know, I'm only interested in this. If it's a South Delhi girl thing, I'm a South Delhi girl. I only want to listen to this. So, you know, it's become very, very, very interesting how communication is changing, how it will continue to change and evolve. And yeah, that's what I'm noticing in all the strategies I've been building or the content I've been building on in the last 2 years. So yeah, that's my take on this.
So
I just like to add up one more point before we
Yes.
go into the next session. And I'm taking off from what Shikha had stated about visitors who are coming in from different countries. For instance, when I have a visitor who comes into Hyderabad, I'm not going to take them to a global franchise like McDonald's, right? I will take them for a Hyderabad biryani. Because and therefore I will take them to a restaurant which is extremely local to the taste and culture at this place. So I mean, come on. I mean, I need to be able to portray the culture of this particular place. And for that, obviously, it's got to be hyperlocal.
Yeah. And even vice versa.
But I think one of the, sorry.
No,
In fact, one of the you know, things that, you know, even as long ago as I think I was working on the Pizza Hut launch for India, you know, which was I think this was in 95. I'm trying to remember the year. Was it 95?
Yes, it was 95, 96, correct.
Yeah. So this is when I was with JWT in Delhi, you know. And the whole thing was, in fact, the wonderful thing was that you had a brand which was coming in, you know, with, you would imagine that it would come in with a lot of diktats, you know, of the MNC, you know, the motherhood kind of stuff. But, you know, they came in with that perspective that it needs to be very, very tailor-made for India. And they also made sure that even in terms of as, you know, I'm saying this is as long back as then, when even the menu was tailor-made, you know, saying that, okay, you know, when you want to say we'll have a chicken tikka pizza as a topping, you know, that was acknowledging, saying that, you know, we're going to give them what Pizza Hut stands for, but we're also going to make sure that we give that to them with you know, the things that they're familiar with, you know, so the exotic with the familiar. And it was very similar to, you know, even when I was telling Pallavi in our conversation before this, you know, that even when I was writing The Mills and Boon, I was very clear that so many generations of women who had grown up reading romances before that, you know, we were getting it secondhand, right? You were getting people who were using terms of endearment that weren't familiar to you. You were getting, your Miya Karya, your Kara, you were getting Jatem and blah, blah. But, the thrill of saying, now you're going to read Meri Jaan, or whatever, you would get the local flavor into it, which is what was, exciting for everybody and what caught caught everybody's imagination in such a big way. But there was also a flip side that for instance, when I wrote my second book, Shikha, this is to add to what you were saying, which is that you are very conscious of saying that you want to make the content relevant to that
Yes.
geography. So for example, when I was writing my second book, I was writing it was set in Delhi, it was set with people, TikTok Where 30 was set with characters who represented that very Delhi metropolitan kind of urban sort of Indian, who uses mixed languages. There is all kinds of, and so it's not your perfect good English. And so as far as my characters were concerned, I wanted, for instance, there was a character who was Malayali but a wannabe Punjabi, and I needed to make sure that I represented that part of him, so his usage of constantly saying changa changa chale changa, so that's representing his Delhi aspirations. And I remember when I was writing it, my beta reader, she said, are you sure you want to do this? Because on one hand you're doing this, but you're going to also lose a lot of people who don't understand Hindi at all,
Yeah.
and I was also, I also don't like I like the narrative to be clean. So if there is a narrator, then their language has to be
Yeah.
upbeat and whatever, but obviously not compromise on that, but your characters must be authentic. So
Absolutely.
it's always a very conscious choice to say, I'm doing this, I will make my characters speak the way I want them to speak, and I'm fine with if I lose readers in a larger sense, but I want to be more authentic and true to the people who I want to represent.
Yeah.
So that whole localizing of content in that sense, is again a pretty conscious choice. Even as a writer, when you say that, okay, I'm fine, and I did, I mean, the funny thing was that there were people who had, let's say, loved the first book, which was with the UK editors, where therefore while I was bringing in Indian terms and endearments and blah blah, but it was written in in correct good English. And the second book, which had a lot of English coming into it, which your characters spoke in different meters and different, which was a book which I enjoyed a lot more because I just felt it was a lot more authentic. But I had the occasional review where people would suddenly say give it a less rating, and I remember the reason for it, and that would be, I don't like reading books which are not written in good English. Okay, I'm fine. You don't like it, too bad, but I do want to write the book that I believe will be true and will be enjoyed by many more people.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
no, now it's
yeah, I
actually
mean, there is a
become
marketing kind of choice involved in that.
local and vernacular. It's become more socially accepted, We have t-shirts
Yeah.
with the Devangari script. We have soft furnishings. Ayurveda is cool again, all the
Yoga,
brands.
look at yoga. It's not just aerobics
Yeah.
any longer, right?
Kama Ayurveda is cool again. Having your Vata Pitta cup and all that is cool again. So yeah, I mean, people are buying Tata cars again. So it has, evolved subtly over the years. So it is now, I mean, don't get me wrong, English is still important. It's our business language. But I think, our dialects are catching up pretty fast. And with younger people,
Well,
with millennials and younger, now it's cool to be Indian. So yeah, that's how it's shaping our content and storytelling as well. Yeah.
Right. So continuing with that, Shikha, which was so relevant to our next question, which is so all of this has been around for a long time. How content is localized and storytelling has been localized, even business and marketing, all of that. So how did this come back now into such a buzzing trend of late, especially in the past, I think, if I'm right, but 5 to 8 years, it's been a little more trending. So what happened there? Any of you, whoever would like to go first.
I think perhaps Milan again, right? We can start with Milan and then
Because
move on.
Auntie, you have to leave too. So I'm sorry, Milan. Sorry. I'm getting used to it. It's gonna take a minute.
Yeah. Do whatever is comfortable. And talking about being comfortable in our skin, well, if auntie is comfortable, then auntie is fine, So we're owning. I mean, it really answers your question in a sense, which is that we're owning what we are. And I think that the end of the day, it's saying, I mean, from earlier having a hangover and saying, that hangover lasted a very long time. And I think at the end of the day, money speaks, so if you've got the buying power and this is what you want, it's going to reflect in every single thing that you consume, right? So whether it is content that we're seeing out there, which is localized content, which is reflecting what is happening with characters now, with people, say a film like Sir, which is so sensitively made, which is reflecting, the whole class, issue and
Divide.
difference. And yeah, so when, especially when, let's say, people are being exposed to thinking, whereas earlier your exposure was also so much less, right? You only had your, X number of channels on, and the DVDs that you could get your hands on, and now you don't have that. And so, that whole even duplicity, or at least a sense of understanding, at your double standards. Let's say even a film like the White Tiger, what it did, right? When you saw the family, the couple, when they come from America, and the whole supposed sort of sensitivity and progressive attitude, and feeling bad for the working class. But when the family is with them, it's like, till then it's like, nay, you are family, come sit with us, to the help. But the moment there is a crisis, it's like, let's pin it on the help and everything else, and then you see all the standards sort of
Eroding. Correct.
thin out. Yeah. So I think all of it is reflecting what is going on with us as people. And the fact that the content is reflecting that is, at the end of the day, we have the money, and that's where the content is coming from. If say a film like Sir, or a film like The White Tiger didn't have an audience, you wouldn't see that content out there. So at least the fact that there is content being made with a cognizance of the fact, that, let's say, okay, I'll get this much kind of viewership, So you do it. I mean, earlier, what was the option? You only had to say, okay, I'm going to do an art film which has such a small little, theater going kind of stylized audience, or I do commercial. And now you don't have that kind of divide at all, and that is purely dictated by the fact that there is a viewership, there is a sponsorship that's coming in for it, and all of it is reflecting the fact that we want content which reflects who we are now, and we're owning it, I think.
Okay.
Everything, we're enjoying our quirks.
Talking of books, I think, I remember the time when Mills and Boon used to be our favorite, absolutely. In fact, I've been looking at, I just picked up one more, just to go back in time after I heard, Milind, that you were going to be on this show. But, when I think back about our school days, for example, we still really looked at the TDH kind of man, right? The tall, dark, and handsome. Yeah. Little realizing at that time that dark was never something that was really acceptable in Indian society. Right? I mean,
dark was just meant to be actually apparently dark was just a dark haired. So
yeah, exactly. But it's always, we look at a swarthy complexion, we look at somebody who is really, got all that muscle tone, etc., which is going to be more swarthy and things. That's one part of it. But also, I think when I look at, what's been happening in India recently, I would say that if you take the last 20-25 years in India, whether it was a chicken and egg, but finally globalization had allowed a lot of people to travel, a lot of, international products coming into India, international brands coming into India, right from the 1980s, late 1980s, the Pepsis and the Colas, etc., coming in. I think we did develop a kind of a yearning for some products which was not clearly available in India, and we were prepared to pay a price for that. And again, with a lot of people then moving around and going out of the country, traveling, I think bringing back the Silkiens kind of conditioners, or the Vela shampoos, etc. I think those were all things that we used to do. Today, it's no longer there. Today, in fact, when you go out shopping outside, you say, what is it that is not available in India, and therefore I think our bags are much lighter, for one thing. I remember the worst thing of all was that I
It's
was on
funny.
a
It's
cruise,
funny you say this. It's funny you say this,
know.
Lekha, because my daughter is going back to Delhi tomorrow, and I kept saying, what do you want to carry back with you? What's special from
Masalas.
Bangalore? So I kept saying, do you want to take Nandini ka pedas, Dharwad
Yeah,
pedas? She said, like, but why? I can just order it, and 2 days later on
it's
Amazon
going
it'll
to
arrive
come.
home. No, why do you want me to
Exactly.
lado it from here?
Exactly.
So that
Even pickles, for instance, sending it across to Palu or to my daughter in New Zealand, it's exactly the same. I mean, she says, why are you doing it? I can go across and pick it up from the Indian store out here. So, that divide, that countrification that we used to have of, okay, going there and picking up Agra ka peda from Agra, Agra ka petha from Agra alone is no longer there. No, I mean, we are able to get anything everywhere. So I think that's one. And the second thing that has happened is over the last, let's say, 10 years, I would say that this identification of things which are Indian is more. It's become more classy to now have things which are more Indian rather than international. So if you're having a dinner and you'd like to lay plates on the table, you're not anymore looking for the bone china from Noritaki. What you're going to be looking at is probably, having earthenware on the table, which is picked up from, okay, cottage industries or whatever, but picking up things from the local market has become a lot more stylish today than it was earlier. So I think it's the same as saying that no longer is a French chiffon as fashionable as probably wearing a ghagra choli to social soiree. So I think it's much like being able to be, whether it's authentic or be with the times. I think a lot of us, more than
yes.
authenticity, we are really looking to be accepted by a lot more people, and therefore we will go with what makes the most marketing sense, I guess.
Right.
Right.
Shikha, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just actually, it's interesting because I had done some research on this topic because for a presentation I had to make to someone. So I have a very interesting quote actually, which I'd love to share with you. So this is by a gentleman named Rajan Anandan. He's the VP of Operations for Google India and Southeast Asia. So he says, English is over. There are only about 200 million Indians who are proficient enough in English, and they're already on the internet. Almost every new user we see coming onto the Google database, roughly about 9 out of 10 are not proficient in English. So it's very fair to say that almost all the growth of usage on Google is coming from non-English users who want more localized content. So, it's very telling, it's very interesting. There is actually some more data to back that up. So the number of people with some education in English is estimated to be between 125 to 200 million, which is less than 5% of Indians, or less than 70 million are actually fluent enough in English to keep it as their principal language of communication, or seek it or use it while they are seeking information while browsing the internet or looking for content. So thus, after being available only in English for over 3 decades, finally, the internet is diversifying enough into local regional languages in India. And the number of non-English users in India has risen sharply over the last 5 years. And adding to that, so for the first time, I think, just give me a minute. So Google search engine will now support 9 Indian regional languages. Currently it does, and this number is set to rise over time. So I mean, if that doesn't demonstrate why we are discussing this topic today, I don't think anything else does. So yeah, that's your data right there from Google.
Right. So this whole, I mean, the globalization itself has been so fast moving and so beautifully done at that in so many aspects. But at the same time, it has created a sense of urgency because information is so easily accessible, and so much of information is easily accessible about diverse range of topics. So when it comes to content creation and storytelling itself, how does the sense of urgency that people have, like a consumer wants what's happening tomorrow, like last night. So how does that affect content creation and storytelling? And we've discussed globalization and the impact of it, but to maintain authenticity of it, what goes into that?
So perhaps Milan can answer and then she can leave. I think
Sure.
you have to leave, Milan.
Yeah. See, I'll tell you one of the things, Pallavi, that, as we said, we started off by saying that storytelling is never going anywhere. But, we've seen formats changing, ourselves. I mean, we're also consuming, things in so many different ways. So some things, we're still learning. For instance, I would have thought that, with shorter attention spans, people would consume short stories more, for example. And I think that a lot of platforms did try that. There were publishers like Juggernaut who tried to market, short stories alone, standalone short stories. I can't speak for them how it worked as a business, but from what I see, is that it's not as if people still want to, this thing like, yeah, like that's all I have time for while I'm waiting for my cab. I'm just going to read that. So somewhere people still want the completeness or the warmth that they believe, or let's say even the commitment that a novel brings. I think that conceptually people want to be in it for the whole thing, and they see, maybe they appreciate short stories or short cinema or short films as a form, but the long format is not going anywhere either, so you have simultaneous sort of, different tastes that are developing. So it's not an either or situation. It's not as if, oh, okay, so now that I know Thai food, I'm going to stop eating Chinese food. It's not. It's like you still have an appetite for that. You still have an appetite for Thai. You also now suddenly find that, okay, Japanese has started coming in. Actually, I find that I quite like it. Maybe you think that earlier you thought that it only meant that you got to eat raw fish, but now you discover that no, actually there is enough there for vegetarians and so on also. So I think people are learning in the process, and so you're just finding that the offering has become greater. But it didn't mean that one form died out. I don't think that, let's say that storytelling in its original long, leisurely form died and went anywhere. Okay. Not by going by the number of books that come out every month. And the second thing is that all of us also, we're experimenting and having fun, learning. For example, in one of the books that I released last month, on Valentine's Day, it is called Mates, Dates, and Double Takes, which is a set. It's an anthology of short stories for, it was originally meant for young adults, but the way I had kind of put it together was that it's stories about first love. So you can experiment with form, which I did there with one of the stories, which is called A Blind Double Date. So the entire story is written in the form of text messages. Every scene, every shift in the scene is between characters who are busy texting each other, even on a date, even before the date, after the date. And it's all there with no other narrative or descriptive text other than what is happening through dialogue, so to speak. With text is just dialogue, right?
Right.
Or even the fact that you just see the ... and somebody's going on texting away is still telling you what's happening. It's communicating action, but it's a different format. And I think that's what is making it so, not good to be doing what we are in these times, where so much change is kind of compressed in a pretty short time. And nothing has brought it out even more vividly than 2020, where your avenue is kind of blocked up for a while, because you knew that publishers have also got a backlog. Anybody who had planned to get a book out in 2020 is now only going to be doing it in 2021. So if you want to pitch a new book, either you wait another 2 years, or for example, somebody like me, and then I saw a lot of other people who were experimenting at that time with self-publishing, which again became a shorter, more accessible way to bring your work to people. It helped you see immediately. It's like, in a way, as a creator of content, every single day you could see how many pages were being read. You could see which of your books was being read more. You could get that information and that immediate sort of response, and you could see if you wanted to tailor make anything. Even you could change your covers even if you wanted overnight. So
Yeah.
that's given a lot of flexibility, which became immediate and a response to the times we're in.
Right.
So, it's interesting that you say this, because I think that it's a lot to do with the generation also that we are in. I think the baby boomers, of which I'm a part, obviously would probably still be okay with getting the long variety, whether it's a test match of 5 days or it is, a T20 or a T10 or whatever they're going to come up with next. I think that's one. The second thing is also we have enjoyed variety, right, as a force. And I think the more that, like you spoke of food, the cuisine, I don't think we're just going to be happy with only Chinese every time. And it's so true. I think we do want to have different kinds of cuisine, etc. Similarly, I think the short stories and the short films have definitely taken a rise, especially I think during the pandemic. I know that I, for one, can no longer sit through the 56 or the 130 episodes of the Hindi soaps that we used to be so hooked on to earlier. For me now, when I look at, Pakistani drama, for example, I'm still looking for the 19 to 24 kind of episode things that they are. When I look at a crime story, I would like to see that they are going to be separate ones, because I want to fit in so much more into my day. I need that completeness that happens in a day, rather than continuously waiting to be able to see who's going to be the murderer. Like I think the Agatha Christie kind of books are no longer going to sustain me the way in which the short episodes and the short stories really do pique my interest. Plus, the other thing which I enjoy very much, and that's why I'm going to pick up this book of yours that you said about make, take, and double take. Definitely, I'd like to see
dates and double take.
Okay, so just send that to me again. I'm going to definitely pick that up, because I believe that it's something which allows me to look at the perspective of one author and many dimensions, one theme and many stories. So I think that variety that is required, and as well as the tedium, not any longer wanting to stay with the tedium of a single type of food, story, sport, art form, movie. I don't think I personally, though I'm a baby boomer, I don't any longer have that kind of time and patience to be able to do it even now. So I think it's a sign of the times, as well as generational changes that have occurred. Similarly, also, even when I walk into a store today, I'm no longer content to only go for Quaker oats, right? I'd like to see the different varieties of millets and fast food, the generic foods which are available, along with the specialities of that particular region for breakfast, for instance. I think that we are spoiled for choice today. And no longer are we going to be content with anything else. So I think the consumer has truly turned out to be queen in these days, which wasn't there earlier. Okay. We were still happy with the Ford. You want a Ford, you can take any color as long as it's black. That's gone. No longer is that going to be available to us today. Right.
Yeah. No, I think the consumer has also become very conscious. The consumer has become very conscious of the fact that, that you have, just as, I mean, it's like when people say that, sometimes people say that, even you have, I mean, a product for every mood, right? So it's like in your wardrobe, it reflects that. It's like saying, you need your leisure wear, you need your vacation wear, you need your work wear, you need your blah, blah. So similarly in the content, you're in the mood for a certain sort of thing and you're indulging it. Whereas earlier you thought you had to stay true to type. And that's true of the creator as well as the consumer. I don't know how well that works though in marketing. I mean, you guys would be better to talk about it, because I've always found that it was good if you stuck to your core strengths. At least know the brand for that,
No, the brand for that, but then the brand is only going to be taking it, using it as a super brand, right? One of the products is a super brand, and there are going to be many more which are going to be the piggybacking kinds on that brand, because you never know where the market is going to change. So you will need to definitely create that kind of a surge for the PLC to take off, the product life cycle to take off at any point in time. Supposing that main product is going to go down, and you put all your eggs in one basket, then the little Britannia biscuits that they are, little hearts biscuits, are no longer going to sell, right? You need to be able to have a variety which is going to be picking up the market slowly and allowing this new taste to also build in. So I don't think marketers also are going to be happy to stick with one genre, one type, one service. And that is why you see so many alliances and mergers that are taking place, acquisitions that are taking place. Because while I as a company might stick with my core competency to be able to keep my profits there, I'm still going to be able to work with others to give me that reach to different kinds of markets or different products, and probably that all-in-one that today's customers are not going to be picking up a car without also looking for all the spare parts in that particular one-stop shop itself. I will definitely not obviously go into looking at Sun Film, but I would look for somebody to supply the Sun Film at my retail store, right? And that's very important. I think the call for time and quality of products, as well as being able to get whatever you want in the shortest span of time and for the maximum amount of value of money, for example, VFM, I think is definitely a sign of the times. Okay.
Right. So just the last question, we're almost done, is
Yes.
what, with such high expectations that the consumer has of any product that's being put out into the market, what is the future? I mean, what can we estimate when it comes to content creation and storytelling, and the future of it?
So, I'd like to take a step back and just look at where this bit of, marketing has really taken us to.
Mm-hmm.
If I look at online and offline, like you have the ROPO kind of syndrome, right? So you say that people are researching offline and purchasing offline earlier. That's what it used to be, right? Used to go ask people, what is this TV like? How is this, etc.
Yes.
See what's in the newspaper. And then you finally go across to 10 shops and then you pick up whatever you want. That was the researching offline and purchasing offline as well. Then we moved into the researching online and purchasing offline, right? So we said, all right, now let's go across and now let's look at what are people talking about this product. But I'll still go across to the Bata store and pick up whatever I want out there. I'll ask people what they're looking for and how did they find that particular style. Is Hush Puppies, for example, really worth it, and so on. And then I finally go across and pick up what I want at the physical store. Right. But a few years back when I went across to UK for one of my projects, and one of my clients was a high street leather footwear person. And it was very interesting to find out that the software that they were looking for was really only to look at the warehousing of it, because people were no longer coming across to the stores to buy products. They were coming across there because there is no uniformity in sizes and fit of shoes. Okay. So therefore they will walk into the store. They will actually research offline, but they will purchase online because they're going to be able to get the discounts of, the volume buys or the volume, as well as the direct to customer kind of sale that there is. So therefore the stores over there were really only testing grounds for sizes and designs. So people would come there, try out a shoe and say, okay, fine. So this is the shoe, etc. Make notes of it, go back, buy it online. But today, especially in the pandemic, we've all moved into the researching online and purchasing online. We're hardly going to the stores, and it's not only because of the pandemic, but I think now we've got so used to purchasing everything online, and hopefully there's a little more standardization. Plus, of course, if I look at the aggregators like the Amazons and the Flipkarts, especially the Amazon, which does not preclude me from returning something if it doesn't fit. I can return it in the first 3 days after purchasing it, right? And of course, there are a lot of people who do take advantage of that as well. But it at least allows me to take a chance on not getting the right kind of, size or the fit. And doesn't matter, let me test it out. So I think that has been something which has been a huge change in the way the marketing of products, the marketing of, the hyper local kind of stores which are available also are no longer necessarily the place that I'm going to be purchasing at. I will still look for the hyper local stuff, but I'll do it online. And I will still look for the comparison shopping online that I would have not done earlier. Yeah. Earlier, I would have just walked across somewhere and picked up whatever is available, right? Yeah. Right.
So now even retailers like Zara, so what people are doing, for example, they'll get a small, medium, large, they'll try which fits them best, and they just go to the store and return it. or send
Absolutely.
someone to return it, whoever's like running the errands to the mall. So
Correct.
things have
Right.
become so easy now, you know.
Yeah,
In fact,
and that's also possible online too.
yeah,
Shikha, you know,
absolutely.
I mean, just to give you to let you know, I've lost 42 kgs over the last 1 year. Okay, 40. So
Wow.
you can imagine what my size was like. That's beside the
That's
point.
amazing.
But
That's
you know,
amazing.
and therefore I've had to get a completely new wardrobe. Now I didn't
Wardrobe,
know
yeah.
what size fits me because I was so used to wearing 3XL and 2XL earlier. And
Yeah.
now suddenly I'm saying, okay, now what's going to fit me in which brand? So I pick up a small, medium, large.
Yeah.
Right, because you don't know what's going to fit you in which brand, and then
And
it's
with-
great fun
with
when you
yeah.
can actually return the large also.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. So what actually, you know, this is something, Pallavi, I really love about India. It's like this whole matrix-like country where things are going on at so many levels. So
Right.
there's place for hyper localization, there's place for globalization, there's place for all sorts of content, all sorts of
Generic
stories.
branding, generic
Yeah,
branding.
generic branding.
Right.
And you know, I think that's what I love about our country, and it's really a very exciting time to be a content creator, to be a marketeer, to be a PR person, because things are changing every minute and every second, and I just love the direction it's going in and where it's taking. I'm learning something new every day. I've been working for the past 20 years and I thought I'd seen it all, but I haven't. So I'm, you know, it's an amazing experience. I think the changes our country is going through and everything which we are seeing, for sure.
Right.
Nice to hear you say that, because you know I've been working for the last 40 years, so double what your time is, and I'm still learning as well.
Yes,
I'm still learning, and things are changing so fast. So it's a VUCA
fast.
world, right? Right
Yeah,
now it's so
absolutely.
complex and it's so ambiguous, and there's so much of volatility. But it's wonderful because you just have to have all your senses and your antennae out there to be able to receive information and keep on adapting to what is going to be there. Like even when I look at the pandemic and how it has affected the working world, and we keep talking about the new normal, but it's not normal yet, right? We
Yeah,
don't
it's
know
not.
what the new normal is going to be like. I mean, we're just going into a third wave, for example. And I don't know when we'll be able to return to the way in which we ever worked earlier. Is a mask going to still be there, you know,
No, you're
forever for
right.
the rest of
Yeah,
my
yeah,
life? No
absolutely.
one knows. So
In
there
fact,
is
you
going
know,
to be a lot of transience in
learning.
everything that
Yeah.
we're doing: behavior, attitude, products,
Absolutely.
everything.
So, in fact, you know, just as an aside, there was a point last year where I thought that my career was over. You know, I would never get another job and I'm too old for this now. And thankfully, I was able to pull myself out of that funk and reinvent myself, relook at many things. And now it's exciting because now I'm again relearning, you know, learning new things, getting on back on the bandwagon, as they say. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a very exciting time to be alive professionally. And there's so much to look forward to. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's absolutely fabulous to also teach. Huh? So I would invite you into this field of teaching. If you can get into teaching right now, I think that's the best way to keep learning, because these youngsters of 20 and 24 years old are continuously challenging you in that classroom. And, you know, they're trying to keep you outdated, but you need to be one step ahead. So you better learn before they bring you down, you know, so it kind of keeps you on your toes.
Well, that was it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Until next time, take care and spread the love.